Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. So now we are with our last, but definitely not the least activity of our today's first International Applied Linguistics Symposium at Prince Sultan University. So we have Dr. Khansa Al-Qudaimi with us, who is an assistant professor in the College of Language and Translation at Al-Imam Muhammad bin Saud Islamic University. She did her graduate studies in applied linguistics, and she has taught English for 6 years. She presented many workshops for AFL teachers. Her interests include discourse analysis, educational technologies, and teacher education. And today we'll have a workshop by her, and it will be a 60-minute workshop, and we'll have a 30-minute question and answer session towards the end. To have a smooth presentation throughout the workshop, I would recommend if everybody will keep their mics at mute. And if you have a question and it is related to any activity going on, you can raise your hand and your mic will be unmuted and you can speak. Or else if you have a question in general, you can write it in question and answer section of the Zoom. All right. So floor is all yours, Dr. Khansa.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. I welcome everyone to this workshop. I'm glad to be amongst you today and to have you in this workshop. I hope this workshop will be interactive and informative at the same time, and I hope that we can share our experiences to make use of them. Okay, so as you heard from Dr. Fatma, my name is Khansa Al-Qudaimi. I work at the Imam University. I'd like to know about you more. Okay, are you specialized in applied linguistics or translation? If you're specialized in applied linguistics, please raise your hand. Ms. Budur, you are specialized in applied linguistics. So only one. Okay, so also I'd like to know, where do you work? If you could write in the chat, where do you work? In which university? Or okay, so we have Manal Al-Thaqafi, who is translated and specialized in translation. Imam University, PSU. Great, Dr. Farah, I know you. Great, we work together. Okay, what about the others? Okay, so if you can, please raise your hand and tell me, why did you join this workshop, which is EFL Learners in Intercultural Communication, how to take a stance in social networking sites. Why did you join this workshop? Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome Budur, Miss Budur and Miss Manal from Tarajim, and also Miss Farah from Imam University. There is Miss Manal from PSU. There's Dr. Philip. I think I attended your paper from Ghana. Okay, so I would like to hear your voices, ladies and gentlemen, to know you more.
Okay, Doctor, I'm I'm actually a co-host, but
Yeah.
I'm here to watch your and listen to your presentation and participate.
Yes, Dr.
So I will tell you, I have a master's in TESOL from London,
MashaAllah,
I'm very much interested in pragmatics and intercultural competence.
MashaAllah,
Apart from being the host, I'm very much interested in the intercultural communication and how to adapt it and use it and be more efficient in the classroom and in the workplace, especially here in Saudi Arabia, where many of us are Muslims, but we're coming from different parts of the world with our different backgrounds and ideas about teaching. So we do need to collaborate together, and there's that point of communication that we need to learn how to do outside of the classroom as well as inside.
Great. Actually, we share the interest in intercultural competence and intercultural communication. So I'm glad to have you here, Dr. Fawzia. And I'm glad to have everyone here today. So before we start, have you ever tried to notice the use of stance and stance taking by Saudis in social networking sites? If you did, please type 1 in the chat. If you have ever tried to notice the use of stance or stance taking in social networking sites, please type 1 in the chat. Okay, so I understand from this that you haven't. Okay, Dr. Fawzia. So, before we start our workshop today, let's see why this workshop, why we need to have this workshop. Actually, you can see that these objectives are taken from the website of the symposium. Today, inshallah, we're going to tackle 2 of the goals that we have here. Let me share them with you. Oops. Okay. The first one is to raise awareness of the recent research findings in language studies, and the second one is to establish the necessary linkage between applied linguistics research and real life applications, and of course in our case it is language teaching. Okay, how are we going to tackle this? We're going, inshallah, to fulfill 4 goals. We're going to define stance taking, its process and characteristics. We're going to distinguish between the 4 types of stance taking, update our knowledge regarding research findings, and finally construct our exercise using stance markers. How are we going to do this? By tackling these 3 topics, which are: what is stance taking? How is stance taking employed? And finally, we have study findings on stance markers of Saudi FL learners in intercultural communication. Of course, inshallah, we're going to have activities and discussions related to these topics. Now, let's start with our first part, which is: what is stance taking? We can see here in front of us a definition by one of the well-known researchers in the field of stance, who is Dubois. Okay, he defined it, as you can see in front of you, he defined it as a public act by a social actor achieved dialogically through over-communicative means of simultaneously evaluating objects, positioning subjects, and aligning with other subjects with respect to any salient dimensions of sociocultural field. So, according to this definition, we can see that we have different components of stance taking, and actually he tried to show them in the stance triangle that you can see in front of you now. Okay, so in this stance triangle, he actually he considered this stance triangle as a conceptual framework for a minimum structure of stance as a dialogic action. Okay, so there are this actually this stance triangle shows us the main components of stance, which are evaluation, positioning, and aligning, as you can see here. Okay. Also, there are 3 units, which are subject 1, subject 2, and the object. What is going on between them? We can see that subject 1 is evaluating a shareable object, while both of these subjects are positioning themselves based on the object, and both of the subjects align themselves convergently or divergently to each other. Okay, so this shows us that there are 3 phases of stance taking. The first phase is evaluating the object. The second phase is positioning the subjects, the 2 subjects, and finally aligning with other subjects. Through stance taking, we can see that given this definition and this stance triangle, that the speaker, when they are taking a stance, they are actually giving their judgments or standpoints as framed by their values, which are aligned with certain social groups that, of course, they belong to. Okay, so from this, we understand that there are 3 characteristics of stance taking. The first one is it's being dialogic, right? Since we just said that in the was definition that it fulfills the sociocultural function, right? So that's why it is dialogic. Also, when a student or speakers engaged in stance taking, they actually need to track other stances before and after the involvement in the dialogue in order for them to make their own stances. Okay. Also, sometimes when they engage in this process of stance taking, they negotiate their own stances and other people's stances or other interlocutors' stances. Okay. In this sense, it is actually dialogic, and they express it through their use of lexical, grammatical, and syntactic choices. This is the first characteristic of stance taking. The second one is it's being subjective. And of course, because they're expressing their standpoints, their attitudes, and expressing themselves, that's why it is subjective. While for the third characteristic, which is it's being intersubjective, there is an interesting point here that was expressed by Hunston and Thompson. They said that when someone is expressing their attitudes, actually it is this attitude is not personal, but it is interpersonal. How is that? Because when they try to advance in the discourse, they try to find solidarity from other interlocutors. Okay, so in this sense, it is actually interpersonal. Given these characteristics, again, there is an interesting point which tells us that, from the findings of the research, it shows that actually interlocutors change their linguistic and discursive choices depending on the conversational partner. Okay, that's why we need to understand the context in order for us to understand the process of stance taking. And actually, this is more noticeable in social networking sites. Okay, so given these information that we just shared about the definition, stance triangle, and characteristics, I want you now to take 1 minute, please, or 2 minutes to think about this question, which is suggest 3 reasons why we need to make use of stance taking in our teaching and learning. The goal is to spotlight the significance of incorporating stance taking based on your opinions and experiences in this matter. After that, after the 2 minutes, inshallah, we're going to share our thoughts. So would you please take 2 minutes to think about this question, and we're going to share them after 2 minutes. So now a minute has passed by, so I don't know if there is someone who has something to share. Would you please raise your hand if you like to tell us about your answer?
Yes, ladies, please raise your hands. We can unmute you.
Great, we have here a comment from Manal. It says, to know how people think and process the info they learn about. Great. So to understand people more. Is
Yes,
there any other
ladies.
answer?
Maybe.
Yes.
I was going to say maybe we need to use it for understanding how they think.
Mm-hmm. So you would share your opinion with Ms. Manal here to understand more about how our learners would think.
How we should respond to them. I mean, like, you know, when you've understood them, then you know how to respond to them, perhaps.
Great, how to interact with them.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, hello, Professor Hansa, and hello, everyone.
Hi.
Yeah, I have an answer for this. If I want to share it with you, and you may correct me if I'm in the right track.
Okay.
I think this may help us to when we want to make a lesson for the learners, and what are the best choices and why would they choose this. So this will help us when we want to make lessons for them or sessions for learning languages. Also, this will help us to know the way, as I said before, the way they think, and as what says with you, she said how we respond to their way of thinking. So this may be them. And also this, I think this will help us also to know why would they choose this, and how can we enrich them and enrich their vocabulary or the things they are learning, and try to find like substitutional things or something.
Well, you really I mean, you had the really good opinions here. You gave different points which really touch into our workshop today. So thanks, Ms. Manal, and thanks, Ms. Fatima. You really had great opinions. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. I agree with you, actually. We need to incorporate stance taking in order for us to understand our learners more, to be able to respond to them, as you said, and
this is
to learn.
The ideas that I have about the lesson, and I'm so enthusiastic about the lesson and want to know more from you, Professor. Thank you.
Thanks. Great, Ms. Manal. Thanks for your comment. So, as also you said, enriching the vocabulary of our learning and give them substitutions. Right. So I agree with you, both of you. Actually, incorporating stance, as you said, enriches as it employs the lexical, grammatical, syntactic, and discursive resources. Of course, it enriches our learners. Why and how? Because when they employ the lexical, grammatical, syntactic, and discursive resources that are used in stance taking, they are actually employing particular linguistic expressions, right, which indicate the stance. These expressions are actually intercultural, okay, or they are actually taken from certain cultures, okay, and they are associated with certain activities and roles, okay. In this sense, our learners would be enriched in terms of their linguistic and sociocultural capacities in the second language. While for the second reason, as you can see here, that stance taking has two core functions. The first is textual and the second is interpersonal. So when it comes to the textual part, we know that there is an exchange that is taking place between interlocutors, okay. So we have initiating topics, responding to them, and reinitiating them, and different moves in the discourse. So for the interpersonal level, we have the discourse acts. In using stances or in stance taking, all of these things are being motivated, okay. In this sense, they actually students are being enhanced in terms of their communicative skills, okay, and of course intercultural competence. So thanks, Dr. Fatima and Dr. Manal, for your opinions and for sharing your thoughts about this. Now, after we defined the stance taking and the characteristics and process, let's move to the second part of today's workshop, which is how is stance taking employed? Actually, it is employed in different ways. One of the ways is by using stance markers, and this is our focus today, okay? Stance markers. They use stance markers to disclose their perspective regarding certain propositions. What are stance markers? They are defined by Kuckelman, as you can see here in front of you, as any signs that members of communities associate with a speaker's personal contribution to event construal. These stance markers can be of any part of the speech. They can be particles, adjectives, adverbials, modals, complement taking predicates. Also, they can be verbs, grammatical and syntactic structure, word order, or choice of pronoun. Now, let's see what the research shows when it comes to these parts of speech. When it comes to particle, we can see that in the analysis of stance taking on blogs, Mayers observed that 32 of learners used okay, while 22 used wow or ah, while was used for hesitation and disagreement. Okay, while for the adjective, we can see that the attitudinal markers pleased and the epistemic marker true were used. For the adverbials, we can see that there are lots of options when it comes to the use of learners on social networking sites. Mostly, one of the high frequent one is well, as you can see in front of us. And there are other adverbials that are used surprisingly, importantly, and actually, and other adverbs. For the modals, the two modal verbs must and should are actually where one of the widespread models among participants. And finally, for the complement taking predicates, we can see that there are different chunks that are used by learners. For example, we have I feel, which is common in social networking sites according to research, and also I think, which is as common as I feel. And there are different predicates that are also used by learners. When we try to classify stance markers, we actually have four classes. Okay, you can see them here. They are the evaluative stance markers, attitudinal stance markers, aligning stance markers, and epistemic stance markers. And when students or learners or interlocutors generally use evaluative stance markers, they actually interpret a certain incident based on a certain criteria that they have. So in other words, they evaluate that certain incident. For example, you can see here examples in front of you, the use of prefer, anticipate, hope, claim, or when it comes to informal context, we have that's horrible or it's really great, right? While for the attitudinal, there are different expressions, and we are going, inshallah, to see some of the expressions that are used by Saudi FL learners. And some of these expressions can be repetition, choice of pronouns, or determiners, or other markers. For the aligning, it is the act of calibrating the relationship between two stances, so in which the participants try to align and agree to each other. For example, you can see here that when someone says, I don't like this, an aligning stance would be, I don't like it either, or I agree, right? So this is the aligning marker. While for the fourth marker or the fourth class is epistemic, which refers to the degree of certainty or commitment to the truth of the factual status the interlocutor holds, besides their attitudes towards it. And as we said before, I think is one of the most popular one. Also, there are other chunks like she said, I don't know, and other expressions that are being used as epistemic markers. Okay, so here we have the four classifications of stance markers. Now, please take a minute and think which one of these four classes do you think Saudi students would use more, I mean? Do you think that Saudi FL learners employ evaluative, attitudinal, aligning, or epistemic markers more? Take a minute and think about this, and I don't know if we can have the poll now about this. Yes, now we have a poll. So would you please choose an answer or vote for one? You can choose for multiple ones. Do you think that Saudi FL learners mostly employ evaluative, epistemic, attitudinal, or aligning markers? We will be back, inshallah, in a minute to see the votes results. Okay, so can we see the votes results? Great. So we can see that some of you think that evaluative markers are most popular. One of you think that attitudinal, and one thinks that it is the aligning marker. Okay, now would you please take a minute to think, why did you think this? Why did you think that it is, whether it is the evaluative, the attitudinal, or the aligning? Why did you think that Saudi FL learners would prefer this marker? And please share your thoughts with us. Raise your hand to share your thoughts with us. So Why did you think so? Why did you think that it is the evaluative, attitudinal, or aligning?
Nobody.
Yeah, please raise your hand to answer if you have an answer. Okay, so yeah, so well, the idea is that some of you thought it's the evaluative, some of you thought it's attitudinal markers, and some of you thought that's aligning marker. Okay, so let's see what actually Saudi EFL learners prefer in this study findings. Here we are going to share study findings. Here we have an answer from Dr. Farah. She's saying that evaluative because mainly they are certain of their opinion. Okay, great. Because they have a certain criteria, and based on this criteria, they would actually share their opinion. Well, great. Let's see. Let's see in the study findings whether it is one of the most popular or the most common amongst Saudi learners or no. Now let's see this study, which was conducted in 2017. The sample was 2,000 pre-existing tweets of Saudi EFL learners from public pages and hashtags, and 75 of them were written by university students, where actually 25 were written by employees. Okay, their tweets were posted between 2011 and 2017. They were written for communicating with native speakers of English and non-Arab, non-native speakers. Now let's see their results or the findings of the study. We can see here that the most popular stance markers among the Saudi learners were actually evaluative and epistemic, as what some of you said. Well, the least used were aligning and attitudinal markers. Okay, here are some examples of the most popular epistemic markers and the least used ones. For example, the highest use was for well, and I don't know or I know, while the least used expressions were or markers probably, completely, and other expressions like am, totally, may. Okay, all of these expressions were actually used, were not popular amongst Saudi EFL learners. While for the evaluative markers, we can see here that the study shows that the most popular expressions or markers amongst Saudi EFL learners are good and love, while the least used ones are horrible, expect, and prefer. Okay, so let's see some examples of their tweets. For example, you can see here in the first tweet, one of the learners said, "We will lose because absolutely Bale will play tonight. I hate him so much. I hate Florento also." I don't know these guys, by the way, but let's see the stance markers here. You can see that these are amongst the popular ones, which are well, absolutely. I think absolutely was one of the least used. No. Okay, so the second example, we can see that I am glad you know that, right? So is one of the most popular ones or markers, while in the third example we have I don't know, that's the problem. Okay, so let's find out about the attitudinal markers and the aligning markers. About the attitudinal markers, we can see that the most popular ones were repetition and the sounds a or o, while the least popular markers were ow and anxious and ah. Okay, while for the aligning markers, we can see that the most popular one was right, while the least used one was like me. Let's share some examples here. We can see that one of the examples here is, no, my friend, you're mistaken, right? Which is an aligning marker. Also, we have, I agree with you, or he said right, or wow. Okay, all of these are among the popular markers. Okay, so let me ask you, after we shared these results of the study, what are your thoughts about these findings, ladies and gentlemen? If you have any comment.
You have been allowed to talk. You can just unmute yourself and give your comments, please.
Okay, so also I was going to ask you, how do you think we can make use of them actually? How can we make use of these results in our real life?
Mr. Philip, if you're saying something, we're not able to hear you.
Doctor, can you put the results on the screen?
Yes, of course. So these are the which results do you want? The attitudinal markers, aligning markers, the epistemic and evaluative markers, which are the most popular, by the way. And finally, here we have the most popular ones, which are the evaluative and the epistemic. Are there any thoughts?
I was thinking that maybe these markers are coming from their own interpretation, their own translation, rather than absorbing the language of the culture of, you know, one of the Englishes, whether it's UK or America. So maybe these are translations in their minds that they've just used rather than learnt chunks of language, you know, unless they traveled and, you know, they're familiar with it or merged themselves with English people, speaking people.
So do you think this is a problem? And if it's a problem, do you think of a solution for it?
I don't think it's a problem, because as long as we can understand and we can communicate, I think it depends on the individual if they want to expand that language to communicate, you know, more efficiently and deeply. I mean, I really can't see a solution for that unless we are going to use more language in the classroom, or our textbooks has got more natural language and, you know, the students are exposed to it, or that they listen to some sort of dialogues. How else would they absorb natural language? Yeah.
The informal language, you mean?
Yes, the informal language. Yeah.
Because you know that actually I've gone through a study that was conducted, a recent study that was conducted on Saudi exchange students in Australia. It shows that they would go and study there and come back to home, I mean to Saudi Arabia, and they would not learn much of the informal language because they do not actually I mean, do not engage in activities or things with Australian people. So this is not only for EFL learners, but also maybe ESL learners. That sometimes as you said, they think in Arabic instead of thinking in English, and then translate their thoughts into the second language.
And actually in the classroom, I mean, how much informal or colloquial language do we use? I mean, as teachers, we would stay away from that anyway.
Exactly.
So where would the student, you know, like the exchange students, they would have to be out with them in a very social setting for them to absorb, you know, colloquial language, because they're aware that they're learners or aware that they're foreign, they will speak in a particular way, perhaps. They won't use colloquial language to communicate with them. So yeah, it's a very interesting concept. Yeah, needs more investigation, I guess.
Yeah, I agree with you actually. Thanks, Dr. Fawzia, for sharing your thoughts here and for giving us your opinion.
You're welcome.
Which is an interesting opinion, actually. So,
that was just to warm everybody else up so that they could join in as well.
Yeah, I'd be happy if someone joins.
Dr. Farah Diba has a comment in chat. She says, I think these stance markers can be used in class for critical thinking.
Great, great. Yeah, I agree with you. So in a practical way. So this actually would lead us, Dr. Farah's comment and Dr. Fawzia's comment would lead us to the last activity that we have today, which is suggest an exercise or task that can be implemented in EFL classroom to make use of these findings in language teaching and learning. So if you can please take 2 minutes to think of an exercise or task based on the research findings that we have just shared. The goal is to make use of stance in teaching English as a foreign language. So after these 2 minutes, we can come back and share our thoughts. Just think about an exercise or task that can be implemented in teaching English as a foreign language classroom. Well, the idea here is that these results are taken from natural language, as what Dr. Fawzia said. So they are taken from their informal communication, not from communication that is a part of a lesson or a course. So that's why, in this sense, since they are actually taken from their real life use of language, so I think this reflects their interest in terms of which epistemic markers they would like to, which markers generally speaking, and it would reflect and give us the idea that they prefer the epistemic and evaluative markers in their everyday communication. So in this sense, we can make use of their interest to actually make their make them more engaged in language learning in our classroom.
There is a comment by Dr. Badur in chat.
For example, writing an essay reveals students' opinions through using different stance markers. Great. So this is one of the ways in which we'd actually engage them in our class teaching or language teaching, which is in writing classes, or in which they can actually express themselves by writing their opinions about certain issues by using, for example, epistemic and evaluative markers, since they prefer them. Great, thanks, Dr. Budur. This is an interesting way of making use of the results or the findings of this study. So are there any thoughts, ladies and gentlemen?
Identifying stance markers could be done through maybe a video or a text, and and introduce the idea of inferences.
Great.
And maybe perhaps get the students to infer what they've understood.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is also an interesting way of making use of stance markers through the use of real life language again, or natural language, for them to learn how, what is the correct usage of these markers. Great, Dr. Farah. Also, they can be used in reading texts. So we have different reasons. I would classify your usage, Dr. Fawzi, as, for example, for listening classes, or even speaking. Yes, by using videos. Great. So we have here different uses of the, or let's say different examples of how to employ them in our language class. Yes, also in reading and writing. So you'd combine the four skills together, integrative. Great. So here we have really good examples of how we can make use of the stance taking or stance markers, or the findings of this study in our teaching. Are there any additional thoughts? Okay, so now we come to the conclusion. In conclusion, in this workshop, we have discussed what is stance taking, its a process and its characteristics. Also, we have highlighted the stance markers, its types and classes, and also we have showed a study on Saudi learners' use of stance in their intercultural communication. And finally, we have exemplified the use of stance in our teaching of our language teaching class. To sum up, let's always remember that epistemic and evaluative stances meet our Saudi students' preferences. Now, let me ask you, ladies and gentlemen, if there is any learning point that you gained from this session. If there is something new that you've learned from this session, or something interesting.
Yes, Doctor. I think it was very interesting, a very interesting concept, the stance indicators. And for me, it correlates with the language that we use in the classroom and the language that we don't use, and how it could be implemented in, course books. It can, you can extend it very far. I'm not sure how we would implement it immediately now if it's not part of a course or part of the syllabus. But yeah, very interesting concept. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad to hear this, Dr. Fawzia. And again, I'm happy that it meets our interest of intercultural communication. I'm happy that also you mentioned the idea of incorporating it in, for example, textbooks and let's say, I mean, in a certain methodology. Okay, so thanks, Dr. Budur. So, Dr. Farah, how to incorporate the stance markers in teaching language to the students. Great, Dr. Farah, thanks. So with this, we end with the poll. If you could share it, please. which is if your feedback about this workshop. Please, if you could vote. How did you find this workshop? Was it informative? Was it interactive? And was it engaging? So at the end, thanks everyone for your presence, for sharing your thoughts. And thanks again for Tarajem and for PSU for this well-organized and informative conference, and for our moderator for organizing this workshop.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khansa. It was indeed really thought-provoking workshop, and I was just thinking all the time, how can we use it? What activities can be built around, and how can it be incorporated in our classes? So inshallah, we'll just get more things to do with it. Inshallah, I wish you best of luck in your future ventures as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Fatima, and thanks everyone. I'm really, again, I'm really happy to be here and to be with you and to share something and to actually do something with PSU.
Inshallah, that really makes us more glad.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Any questions, any comments, ladies and gentlemen? Okay, Dr. Khansa, if you would like to share your email, if it's okay with our participants,
Yeah,
zoom it a bit, please,
yeah.
because it's, yes, thank you very much. Yes, thank you. All right, everybody, on behalf of Applied Linguistics Research Lab and Prince Sultan University, thank you very much for joining, presenting, and participating in today's symposium and making it a success. Thank you very much. We're really glad that you were here. Please follow us on Twitter and leave your comments. Thank you once again.